in the cradle of midnight's frost, where the moon wept silver tears upon the birthing dens, a healer's whisper became the pack's unspoken elegy. Isina Valhart moved through the shadowed birthing caves like a ghost woven from mist and mercy, her bare feet silent on the blood-streaked stone. At 29, she was no stranger to the underbelly of the pack's life, the Omega who mended what the Alphas broke, her hands stained with the essences of fevered wounds and stillborn regrets. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of labor, mingled with the sharp bite of winter winds that clawed through the mountain's jagged maw. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced like wary specters across the walls, their flames a feeble defiance against the encroaching night. The collective birthing had begun under a bloated moon, its light filtering through cracks in the cavern ceiling like fractured promises. Dozens of she-wolves labored in the communal dens, their groans echoing off the ice-veined rock, a symphony of strain and hope. Isena had been summoned at dusk, her healer's satchel slung over one shoulder, bundles of moonwort and silverroot, vials of elk's blood elixir, all gathered from the frozen fringes where lesser wolves dared not tread. She was the quiet anchor, the one who knelt in the filth without complaint, her dark hair bound in a simple braid that spoke of no pretensions to glory. But glory was a distant myth in the White Fang pack. Isena knew rejection as intimately as the chill that seeped into her bones. Born to a line of forgotten Omegas, she had been overlooked since her first shift, her scent too faint, her strength too subtle for the warrior's gaze. The Alphas passed her by like autumn leaves underfoot, their mates chosen from the bold and the fierce. She had learned to fade into the pack's edges, her heart a guarded ember amid the roaring fires of hierarchy. Tonight, though, the caves pulsed with vulnerability. Pups were coming, tiny flames of the future, and Isena's role was to ensure they drew breath. She knelt beside Lyra, a young beta whose contractions racked her frame like thunder. "Breathe with the wind, sister," Isena murmured, her voice a soft current against the chaos. Her fingers, calloused from years of grinding herbs under lantern light, pressed cool cloths to Lyra's brow. The she-wolf's eyes, wide with pain, met hers in fleeting gratitude. Around them, the air thickened with the scent of sweat and birthing fluids, the distant howls of sentinels on the perimeter, a reminder that the world beyond these walls was unforgiving. Then, the earth trembled, not the subtle shift of a storm, but a visceral quake that sent pebbles skittering from the ceiling. Isena's hand stilled on Lyra's belly as a low guttural snarl reverberated through the stone, a sound that clawed at the primal core of every wolf. Feral eyes gleamed in the torchlight spilling from the outer tunnels. Lunar beasts. Enraged by the moon's pull, driven mad by some ancient curse that twisted their forms into monstrosities of fur and fang, they had breached the wards. The pack's borders, strained by endless skirmishes with rival clans, had faltered. Panic erupted like a dam breaking. She-wolves cried out, clutching their swollen bellies as the first beast lunged into the den. A hulking shadow with eyes like molten silver, its jaws dripping foam laced with blood. It was no ordinary rogue. Its hide bore the scars of lunar frenzy, veins pulsing with unnatural fire beneath matted fur. The sentry's roars joined the fray from afar, but here, in the heart of birth, defense was a fragile illusion. Isena rose, her healer's calm fracturing into resolve. The beast's gaze locked on the nearest litter, a pup slick with afterbirth, mewling on the stone beside its exhausted mother. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the glint of fangs and the fragile curve of tiny limbs. Without a word, Isena stepped forward, placing herself between the abomination and the vulnerable. "No," she whispered. Not to the beast, but to the fates that had always deemed her expendable. The creature struck like a gale, its claws raking across her side in a blaze of agony. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, tearing through flesh and muscle, blood welling warm against the cave's chill. She staggered but did not fall, her body a barrier as she shoved the pup toward safety. Another swipe followed, deeper this time, carving into her shoulder with the force of winter's wrath. Bones cracked, her vision blurred with crimson haze. Yet she stood, arms outstretched, her cries mingling with the mother's screams. From the tunnels, the clash of steel and snarls heralded the warrior's arrival. Corin Whitefang's elite guard, their armor etched with ancient runes that caught the torchlight in prismatic gleams. But Isena saw none of it. Her world was blood and breath, the metallic flood soaking her tunic, pooling beneath her knees. She collapsed as the beast was felled, its body thudding to the ground in a spray of dark ichor. Hands pulled her back, rough, urgent, but the damage was done. Wounds that would claim any wolf, Omega or not. In the haze, as healers rushed to staunch the flow, Isena's gaze lifted to the cavern's ceiling. Moonlight pierced the cracks, bathing her in a cool, ethereal glow. It felt like a caress, a silent witness to her defiance. The pack would survive this night because of her, yet she lay broken, her life ebbing like snowmelt into the stone. Rejection had been her shadow, now sacrifice was her shroud. But in the depths of her fading pulse, a whisper stirred, not of despair, but of something vast and unyielding, like the moon itself refusing to set. What strength was this, born not of fang or crown, but of a healer's unyielding stand? The cave's chill deepened as the last echoes of battle faded, leaving only the ragged symphony of breaths and whimpers. Isena lay on a pallet of furs hastily dragged from the birthing alcoves, her body a map of ruin, gashes across her ribs weeping crimson into the rough weave, her shoulder a mangled knot of exposed sinew and bone. The air tasted of iron and frost, each inhale a knife twist in her chest, but she clung to consciousness like a root to frozen earth. The pup's cries had quieted to soft mewls, safe now in their mother's arms, a fragile victory etched in her fading strength. Healers bustled around her, their hands slick with salves that burned like accusations, murmuring prayers to the moon goddess for a miracle none truly expected. She had always been the unseen thread in the pack's tapestry, mending others while her own edges frayed unnoticed. Now, as blood pooled beneath her, pooling like spilled secrets on the stone, Isena wondered if this was the rejection's final form, not banishment by word, but erasure by fang. The warrior's victory roars drifted from the tunnels, triumphant yet hollow, a reminder that survival came at costs the victors rarely tallied. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, cutting through the murmurs like a blade through mist. Isena's vision swam, but she sensed him before she saw, the shift in the air, charged with alpha dominance tempered by something heavier, like storm clouds, heavy with unshed rain. Corin Whitefang, king of the pack, emerged from the shadowed archway, his silhouette framed by the dying torchlight. At 35, he bore the weight of rule like a cloak of thorns, broad shoulders clad in armor scarred by countless skirmishes, his dark hair matted with sweat and ichor, eyes the color of storm-tossed seas reflecting the moon's pale gleam through the cracks above. He was wounded too, though his injuries were the calculated toll of command, a deep slash across his forearm, hastily bound, and a limp from a twisted ankle sustained in the fray. But it was the guilt in his gaze that struck her first, a shadow deeper than any physical scar. Corin had led the charge against the lunar beasts, his sword a blur of silvered fury, yet the breach had happened under his watch. The pack's borders, frayed by rival incursions and whispers of betrayal from within, had crumbled like ancient ice. He knelt beside her pallet, the scent of pine and blooded steel enveloping her, stirring an instinctive pull in her core, a Omega's ancient recognition of alpha strength, laced with the fear of what it demanded. "Drink this," he said, his voice low and gravel rough, like wind over barren peaks. He held a horn cup to her lips, the elixir within bitter with willow bark and moonflower essence. His hand, steady despite the gash, brushed her cheek as she sipped, the touch igniting a spark she hadn't felt in years, not desire, but a raw, unbidden curiosity. Who was this king who knelt in the blood rather than command from afar? His eyes met hers, stormy depths holding not pity but a mirrored fracture, as if her wounds echoed his own hidden ones. Isina turned her face away, the connection too abrupt, too vulnerable in her weakened state. "The pups. Are they safe?" she rasped, her voice a threadbare whisper, ignoring the fire in her veins. "All but two," he replied, the admission heavy, his jaw tightening. "You bought them time. Healer. More than time. Life." There was no grand proclamation, only the quiet weight of truth, his free hand hovering near her bandaged side as if debating whether to touch the ruin she'd endured for strangers. The cave's winds whispered through the fissures, carrying distant howls that mourned the lost, while the torches sputtered, casting his face in flickering gold and shadow. She should have felt nothing but exhaustion, but fear coiled in her gut, not of him, but of the pull. Alphas like Corin were forged for thrones and wars, their hearts armored against the likes of her. Yet here he lingered, dismissing the betas who clustered with reports of secured perimeters and captured beast remnants. "The frenzy? It's spreading," he murmured more to himself, his gaze drifting to the moonlight slicing the ceiling. "Cursed by the goddess's wrath or some rival's poison. I failed them tonight." The words hung between them, instinctive empathy bridging the chasm of rank. Isena's hand twitched, brushing his armored knee unintentionally, and a shiver passed through her, not pain, but the faint hum of shared solitude. He was the pack's unyielding spine, marked by the duty that had widowed his first mate in a border raid years ago, guilt a constant companion in his melancholy silences. She saw it in the way his shoulders bowed slightly, the king who ruled with ethical iron but questioned every decree in the dead of night. "Why do you stay?" she asked, curiosity overriding caution, her breath shallow against the cave's bite. The air grew thicker, scented with the acrid smoke of doused flames and the metallic undercurrent of healing poultices. Corin's eyes returned to hers, denial flickering like a shadowed flame. "Because a king who turns from the fallen is no king at all." But beneath the duty, fear mirrored hers, the instinctive bond threatening to unravel the walls they'd both built. He rose then, signaling the healers to continue, but paused at the tunnel's edge, the moonlight catching the silver runes on his vambrace, a soft glow that seemed to pulse in time with her faltering heartbeat. As he vanished into the night, the cave's silence pressed in, broken only by the wind's mournful sigh. Isina closed her eyes, the encounter lingering like frost on skin, feared, questioned, yet undeniably alive. What was this thread weaving between exile and throne, born not of choice, but of blood and moonlit necessity? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind howled through the cavern's fissures like a lament unheeded, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoldering beast hides from the tunnels beyond. Isena lay still on the pallet, her wounds a throbbing symphony that drowned out the pup's distant whimpers, each breath a labored negotiation with the encroaching dark. The elixir Corin had pressed to her lips lingered on her tongue, bitter as unspoken regrets, but it could not staunch the tide of blood that seeped through the healer's hasty bindings. She was no warrior, no bearer of fangs or glory. She was the quiet vessel for others' survival, and now her body betrayed that purpose, unraveling thread by fragile thread. Hours blurred into a fevered haze as the pack's medics worked in shifts, their faces etched with the grim calculus of loss. The lunar beast's incursion had left scars beyond the flesh, whispers of poisoned borders, of spies in the shadows who had lured the frenzied creatures to the birthing heart. Rival packs, ever hungry for White Fang's mountain strongholds, exploited the chaos like wolves at a fresh kill. Isina drifted in and out of awareness, her mind a whirl of fragmented visions, the moon's unyielding gaze through the ceiling cracks, the king's stormy eyes holding a fracture she recognized as her own. Why had he lingered? Alphas commanded from afar, their empathy a luxury afforded only to equals. Yet in that fleeting touch she had felt the pull, not the raw instinct of mating, but a deeper current, like roots seeking soil in barren rock. A sudden tremor shook the cave, deeper than the aftershocks of battle, sending dust sifting from the arches like ash from a dying fire. Voices rose in alarm, harsh barks from the outer guards, the clash of steel echoing like thunder in a narrow pass. Isina's eyes snapped open, pain lancing through her side as she tried to rise. The healers scattered, grabbing blades from hidden alcoves, their poultices abandoned in the rush. More of them, one muttered, her voice a thread of fear. Not beasts this time, shadow trackers from the Ironclaw clan. They've come for the weakened. Ironclaw. The name slithered through Isina's thoughts like venom, a rival pack whose alphas coveted White Fang's lunar veins, the sacred ores that fueled their forges and wards. In the frenzy's wake, with borders raw and the king divided between council fires and the wounded, they struck like vipers in the snow. Footsteps pounded closer, mingled with snarls and the wet thud of bodies yielding to fangs. The air thickened with the musk of intruders, foreign scents of pine tar and rusted iron, invading the sanctuary of birth and blood. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, ignoring the fresh bloom of crimson on her bandages. The pups' alcoves were just beyond the central chamber, their mothers huddled in protective circles, eyes wide with terror. Isina could not lie idle. Her sacrifice had bought them breath, and she would not let it end in shadows. Clutching the edge of the pallet, she staggered toward the inner wall, where a narrow crevice led to an forgotten side tunnel, a healer's secret path carved by ancient floods and veiled by ice-veined stone. It was no fortress, but a vein of escape, winding deep into the mountain's frozen bowels. The tunnel's mouth darkened as shouts erupted behind her. A beta guard burst into the chamber, his armor rent and bloodied, dragging a limp form. The king, he's holding the arch, but they're pouring in. Take the weak ones through the old ways. His gaze found Isina, surprise flickering before resolve hardened it. You can't walk. I can crawl if I must, she rasped, the words tasting of iron. But before she could move, the world tilted as strong arms scooped her up, the scent of pine and steel enveloping her once more. Corin, his face smeared with fresh gore, a gash reopened across his cheek, carried her like she weighed no more than a fallen leaf. His breath came ragged, chest heaving against her side, but his grip was unyielding, a bulwark against the chaos spilling into the cave. No time for pride, healer, he growled, voice low amid the din. The Ironclaws seek the pups as leverage, the heart of our future. We hold the line or lose everything. His eyes met hers in the torchlit gloom, not with command, but a shared ferocity, the instinctive bond flaring brighter in the face of threat. He did not set her down as they plunged into the crevice, his warriors forming a rearguard, blades flashing in defensive arcs. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to angle his body protectively around her, the rough stone scraping his shoulders as he pressed forward. Deeper they went, the sounds of battle muffling to echoes, replaced by the drip of meltwater and the rasp of their breaths. Isina's head lolled against his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat a steady drum against the storm in her veins. Pain clawed at her wounds, but here, in this buried vein of the mountain, a fragile sanctuary formed, not of stone or steel, but of necessity. He paused in a wider hollow, where bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls like faint stars, casting a soft, ethereal blue. Gently, he lowered her onto a ledge of smooth granite, its chill seeping through her tunic like a balm. The air here was still, scented with damp earth and the faint, mineral tang of hidden springs. Corin knelt beside her, tearing a strip from his cloak to reinforce her bindings, his fingers deft despite the tremor of exertion. "Why risk this?" she whispered, curiosity piercing the haze. His touch was careful, almost reverent, tracing the edges of her gashes, without flinching from the ruin. Up close, the guilt in his eyes was a chasm, years of lost battles, a mate's ghost in every decision, the weight of a crown that demanded sacrifice from all but him. "Because the pack is not thrones and borders," he said, his voice a quiet rumble, tying the cloth with a healer's precision. "It's the ones who stand when they should fall, like you." Empathy wove through his words, softening the alpha's edge, turning denial into acknowledgement. She reached out, her hand covering his, the contact sending a warmth that chased the cold from her bones. Not love, not yet, but a bond forged in refuge where fear yielded to trust, and the shared pulse of survival whispered of deeper truths. Outside, the wind carried muffled howls, the enemy circling like shadows under the moon. But in this hollow, they breathed as one, guardians of the fragile flames they'd sworn to protect. What was strength, if not this quiet alliance, born of wounds and the unyielding night? The distant clash faded to a tense hush, leaving only the echo of their breaths and the mountain's ancient sigh. Isena's eyes drifted to the fungi's glow, a soft light that mimicked the moon's caress, hinting at revelations yet to unfold. The fungi's ethereal blue pulsed like veins of captured starlight, weaving illusions of safety in the tunnel's womb. Isena leaned against the granite ledge, her body a vessel of fire and frost, each shallow breath stirring the damp air into whispers. The refuge felt timeless, carved from the mountain's indifferent heart, where the world's snarls dissolved into the steady drip of unseen waters. Corin's presence anchored her, his form a shadowed sentinel as he scanned the crevice's mouth, sword drawn across his knees, its blade etched with runes that caught the glow in faint, silvered echoes. The bond between them hummed, unspoken. A thread of empathy spun from shared peril, fragile yet insistent, like roots piercing frozen soil. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, the king's profile sharp against the dim luminescence. Guilt etched lines into his face deeper than any claw, a melancholy that spoke of thrones built on the bones of the overlooked. He had lost his mate to a rival's ambush years ago, her death a scar that bled into every command, every border patrol that failed. Isena knew the shape of such shadows. Her own rejections had been quieter, a lifetime of fading into the pack's margins, her healer's gifts dismissed as the meekness of an omega. Yet here, in this buried hollow, their solitude mirrored each other, two exiles bound by the night's unyielding demand. A shiver racked her, not from cold alone, but from the fever climbing her veins like ivy over ruins. The wounds wept anew, crimson seeping through the makeshift bindings, staining the stone beneath her like spilled prophecies. Corin turned, his stormy gaze locking on her pallor, and he shifted closer, the heat of his body a counterpoint to the chill. "Hold on," he murmured, his voice a low timbre that resonated in her chest, stirring that instinctive pull she had denied since the cave. His hand found her forehead, calloused palm cool against her fevered skin, and for a moment the pain receded, replaced by a warmth that bloomed from within, not his touch, but something deeper, awakening like embers under ash. The air thickened, charged with an unseen current, as if the mountain itself held its breath. Isena's vision blurred, the fungi's light fracturing into prisms that danced across the walls, coalescing into shapes. Silver threads weaving through the gloom, tracing paths unseen. A hum rose in her ears, not the wind's howl, but a celestial song, lunar, ancient, pulling at the core of her being. Her hidden gift, the one she had always attributed to intuition, a healer's mere knack for sensing life's fragile weave, surged forth unbidden. It was no subtle mending, it was revelation, a pathfinder's sight born of the goddess's quiet favor, manifesting now in the refuge's hush. Visions cascaded through her mind. The pack's fractured borders, poisoned by Ironclaw's treachery, lunar beasts twisted not by curse alone, but by tainted veins of ore deep in the earth, a sabotage that spread frenzy like wildfire through dry tinder. She saw the heart of it, a shadowed cavern where rival alphas poured venom into sacred springs, unraveling White Fang's wards thread by thread. And beyond, a greater unraveling. Corrin's own doubt, the guilt that weakened his command, visions of his mate's fall, replaying in endless loops, eroding the pack's spine. But woven through the chaos was a light, soft, crown-like, encircling her form, a halo of moonlight that pulsed with maternal ferocity, binding the scattered flames of the future. Isina gasped, her hand clutching Corrin's arm, nails digging into leather as the sight anchored her to the present. The poison. "It's in the springs below the eastern ridge," she whispered, words tumbling forth like revelations from a dream. "Ironclaw's spies. They mask as traitors. But their blades carry the blight. The beasts aren't cursed by the moon. They're poisoned by betrayal. And you. The pack falters because of the shadow you carry. Her death. It wasn't your failure, but a thread in the weave. Let it go, or it devours us all." He froze, his eyes widening, the alpha's unyielding mask cracking under the weight of truth. The instinctive bond flared. No longer mere curiosity, but recognition, a key turning in a lock, long rusted. Corrin had ruled with ethical steel, his melancholy a private vigil, but he had never seen the full tapestry, the hidden currents that an Omega's quiet gaze could unveil. Her words pierced him, not as accusation, but as a mirror to his soul, revealing how his guilt had blinded him to the sabotage festering beneath the snows. The visions lingered in his mind's eye, shared through the touch, the crown of light hovering above her like a promise from the goddess herself. Soft luminescence, no metal's weight, crowning not a queen, but a mother of the pack, whose sacrifice had ignited this awakening. "You see it," he breathed, awe threading his voice, his hand covering hers in a grip that trembled with revelation. Fear flickered in his stormy depths, not of her power, but of what it demanded, surrender to a destiny where an overlooked healer held the reins of redemption. The pull between them deepened, resisted yet inevitable, a rationalization crumbling under the moon's inexorable pull. She was no mere survivor. She was the pathfinder, the key to unraveling the betrayal that threatened to bury them all. In her eyes, he glimpsed his own rebirth, not through conquest, but through yielding to compassion's quiet command. The tunnel's hush pressed in, broken only by the distant rumble of shifting stone, a reminder that enemies circled above. Isena's strength ebbed with the vision's retreat, exhaustion claiming her like a tide, but the crown's glow lingered faintly on her brow, a symbol of the Renascimento stirring. Corrin pulled her closer, his arm a shield against the encroaching dark, the bond transforming empathy into alliance. What was destiny, if not this unveiling, a healer's sight crowning the fallen, forcing a king to kneel not in defeat, but in the light of true power? Yet doubt lingered in her heart. To embrace this gift meant stepping from shadows into the storm, binding her fate to his, where love's redemption demanded choices sharper than any fang. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the mountain's veins thrummed with the pulse of hidden fury, as if the earth itself recoiled from the venom seeping through its core. Isina stirred in the hollow's embrace, the fungi's glow fading to a spectral whisper, leaving only the raw etch of revelation in her bones. Corin's arm remained a steadfast barrier against the chill, his warmth a reluctant anchor that both soothed and unsettled her. The visions had stripped her bare, exposing the Pathfinder's sight as no gentle intuition but a searing oracle, demanding she wield it amid the unraveling. Doubt coiled in her chest like frostbite. To claim this gift meant forsaking the shadows that had shielded her, stepping into a light that burned as fiercely as it illuminated. He rose with predatory grace, the runes on his sword humming faintly as he sheathed it, his stormy eyes scanning the crevice's gloom. "We can't linger," he said, voice laced with the gravel of resolve, though the awe in his gaze lingered like moonlight on fresh snow. "The iron claws will sniff out this bolt hole by dawn, your sight. It points the way to their rot. We confront it now, or the pack bleeds dry." His words carried the weight of command, yet tempered by the bond they shared, a pull that rationalized itself as duty, even as it whispered of deeper freedoms lost. Isina nodded, pain lancing through her side as she pushed upright, the lunar crown's soft luminescence flickering at her temples, a halo of ethereal silver, weightless as breath, marking her not as queen, but as guardian of the unseen weave. It felt like the goddess's hand, cool and insistent, urging her toward the storm. They moved through the tunnel's labyrinth, Corin's hand steady at her elbow, guiding her over slick stone where meltwater pooled like forgotten tears. The air grew sharper, laced with the tang of ozone and distant smoke, as if the mountain wept for the betrayal gnawing at its roots. Emerging into a concealed ledge high on the eastern ridge, the world unfolded in brutal clarity, snow-swept peaks clawing at a sky bruised with pre-dawn gray, the wind's howl a dirge that carried the pack's fractured cries. Below, the White Fang stronghold smoldered, torches guttering in the courtyard, warriors forming ragged lines against the Ironclaw vanguard. Shadows slithered among the pines, rival scouts with eyes gleaming like forged steel, their alpha's banner a jagged iron claw snapping in the gale. But Isina's sight pierced deeper, unveiling the traitor. Eirik, Corin's once-sworn beta, his silhouette betraying him at the ridge's base, slipping a vial of blight into the sacred spring's mouth, the liquid's venom coiling like serpents into the earth. Corin's breath hitched, a low growl rumbling from his chest as recognition dawned. "Eirik!" he snarled, the name a blade unsheathed, guilt and rage twisting his features into a mask of torment. The beta had been his right hand through border wars, a brother in blood oath sworn under the full moon. His betrayal, lured by Ironclaw promises of power perhaps, or poisoned by the same envy that had widowed Corin, struck like a fresh wound, reopening the chasm of his past failures. The king's hand tightened on his hilt, the instinct to charge warring with the ethical core that had always defined him. Justice, not vengeance, though the line blurred in blood's heat. They descended the ridge's treacherous spine, Isina's steps faltering but unyielding, the crown's light guiding her like a compass through the swirling snow. Flakes stung her skin, melting into rivulets that traced her bandages, mingling with the slow seep of her wounds. The wind whipped her braid like a banner of defiance, carrying uivos from the fray below. White Fang defenders clashing with Ironclaw raiders, fangs tearing fur, blood painting the snow in crimson arcs under the moon's waning gaze. Fire bloomed in sporadic bursts, pitch-soaked arrows igniting barricades, their flames a feral dance against the white. At the spring's edge, hidden by a copse of iced evergreens, they found Eirik. The traitor knelt, his hands stained with the blight's residue, a satchel of tainted ore spilling at his feet. His eyes, once loyal, now flickered with desperate cunning as he whirled, drawing a dagger etched with rival runes. "Coran!" he spat, voice cracking like thin ice. "You cling to thrones built on ghosts. The Ironclaws offer strength, true rule, not this endless bleed. Your guilt blinds you. Join us, or die in the snow." The Alpha's form tensed, a storm incarnate, but Icena stepped forward, her presence a quiet thunder. The crown flared brighter, its soft light bathing the scene in silvered mercy, revealing the webs of deceit, Irik's fear, not malice. Born of a pup, lost to Corin's failed raid years ago, the same shadow that haunted the king. Her sight wove the threads, forgiveness as a blade sharper than war, or freedom in retribution's fire. "He betrays not you alone," she said, her voice steady despite the ache clawing her ribs, "but the pack's heart. Yet the goddess shows paths untaken. Spare him and unravel the poison's root. Strike, and the war consumes all." Coran's gaze tore between them, the moral crux of vice on his soul. Love or freedom, his bond with her demanded compassion's risk, yielding the throne's iron to her light, or war's freedom to purge the rot and reclaim his solitary rule. The wind howled louder, snow veiling the distant clash where Ironclaw's Alpha, a hulking brute named Thorn, roared challenges from the stronghold's gates, his pack pressing the breach with relentless fury. Irik lunged, dagger flashing, but Corin disarmed him with a swift parry, pinning him to the frozen earth, blade at his throat. "Pardon or death?" the king demanded, voice raw with the storm within, blood from a fresh graze on his cheek trickling like tears. Icena's hand on his arm steadied him. The crown's glow pulsing in rhythm with their shared breath, urging the choice that would rebirth them both. Forgiveness meant vulnerability, binding his fate to hers in a union transcending ranks. War promised liberty from guilt's chains, but at the cost of the pack's fragile future. The moon dipped lower, casting long shadows that merged their forms, the air thick with the scent of pine blood and smoldering resolve. Irik's eyes pleaded, the traitor's mask crumbling to reveal a broken wolf, echoing Icena's own past rejections. She felt the weight of it all, the pack's distant howls a chorus of judgment, the rival's advance a tide of inevitability. In that suspended breath, Corin hesitated. The ethical king confronting the ghost of his mate's fall, the war that had claimed her now, mirrored in this crossroads. What was power, if not the mercy to choose redemption over the sword's cold song? Yet as Thorn's bellow shook the ridge, the dilemma etched deeper. To forgive invited betrayal's shadow. To strike ignited a conflagration that might consume the very light crowning her brow. The snow swirled thicker, burying choices in white oblivion, as Icena's heart pounded with the precarious edge of destiny, faith in compassion's crown, or the despair of endless war. The snow's relentless veil thickened around the spring, muffling the distant roar of Thorn's advance like a shroud over a fading pulse. Icena's breath came in shallow bursts, the lunar crown's soft glow pulsing at her temples, a weightless beacon that both illuminated and burdened her. It was no crown of conquest, but of quiet sovereignty, woven from the goddess's mercy, ethereal silver threads that hummed with the pack's unspoken pleas, urging her toward a precipice where choices bled into eternity. Her hand lingered on Corin's arm, feeling the tremor of his restraint, the ethical king teetering between the blade's promise and the light's demand. Irik lay pinned beneath him, the traitor's chest heaving, eyes wide with the raw terror of exposure, his betrayal laid bare like veins of poisoned ore glinting in the frost. Corin's sword hovered at Irik's throat, the runes along its edge flickering with restrained fury, casting prismatic shadows that danced across the frozen ground. The wind clawed at them, carrying the acrid bite of smoke from the stronghold below, where Ironclaw's forces hammered the gates with iron-shod rams, their howls a cacophony of greed and conquest. Icena's wounds throbbed in rhythm with the chaos, blood seeping warmer now, staining the snow in dark petals that the crown's light seemed to trace with silver edges. She had always been the unseen mender, her life a tapestry of others' survivals, but this gift, the Pathfinder's sight, demanded she weave her own threads into the fray, binding rejection to Renascimento in a union that transcended fang and throne. "Forgive him," she whispered, her voice cutting through the gale like a healer's incantation, steady despite the fire lancing her ribs. The words tasted of risk, a moral gamble where compassion could crown them or crumble all. Eric's gaze flicked to her, surprise fracturing his desperation, the beta's broken form echoing her own hidden fractures, the overlooked omega cast aside for lacking the fire of warriors. In her visions, she had seen the root of his fall, not ambition alone, but a pup's grave from Corin's raid, a loss that mirrored the king's guilt, twisting loyalty into venom. To spare him meant unraveling the poison's web, turning betrayal into redemption's tool. To end him invited war's blaze, freeing Corin from shadows but dooming the pack to cycles of blood. The Alpha's stormy eyes met hers, turmoil churning like tempests over the peaks. Guilt had been his constant shadow, the widowhood of his mate, a specter that whispered failure in every council, every border held by threads. Yet, in Isina's light, he glimpsed release, not through solitary rule, but in yielding to the bond that pulled at his core, rationalized as duty, yet blooming into something fiercer, a love resisted until the moon's inexorable tide. "Mercy for a traitor invites the blade at our backs," he rasped, his free hand clenching at his side, the scent of pine and blooded steel mingling with the spring's tainted mist. But beneath the denial, empathy stirred, her touch a current that softened his iron, revealing the pack's true strength not in conquest, but in the quiet choice to heal what was torn. Eric struggled, his voice a ragged plea. "Kill me then, end the farce, but the iron claws come for the veins, the pups, the crown you cling to, your ghosts blind you both." The words struck like frostbite, but Isina's sight pierced the lie, unveiling the antidote hidden in Eric's satchel, a vial of untainted lunar essence, bartered from forbidden traders, enough to cleanse the springs if wielded swiftly. Her crown flared brighter, bathing the scene in a soft luminescence that made the snow gleam like birthing furs, symbols of maternal ferocity rising from sacrifice. She knelt beside them, ignoring the blaze in her shoulder, her fingers brushing the satchel. The contact ignited a surge, her gift channeling through the light, drawing the poison from Eric's veins like threads pulled from a loom. He gasped, body arching as the blight recoiled, dark ichor bubbling from his pores to freeze in crystalline shards on the ground. Corin eased the blade back, not in weakness, but in the recognition of her power. The Omega who had stood between fangs and innocence now wielding the goddess's mercy as a blade of light. "You are the key," Corin murmured, awe threading his voice as he hauled Eric upright, binding his wrists with a strip torn from his own cloak. The traitor slumped, purged and hollow, his eyes reflecting not cunning, but the dawning shame of one redeemed against his will. Below, the stronghold's defenses held, White Fang warriors rallying under the moon's waning arc, their howls shifting from despair to defiance as the crown's glow crested the ridge like a beacon. But Renascimento demanded more than mercy's spark. It required sacrifice's forge. Isena rose unsteadily, the crown's light intensifying, drawing from her ebbing strength to amplify the essence in the vial. She poured it into the spring's mouth, her hands trembling as the luminescence poured forth, a cascade of silver that chased the venom through the earth's veins, purifying the tainted flow with a hiss like steam over ice. Pain crested within her, the wounds reopening in sympathy, blood flowing freer now, her body the vessel for the pack's cure. Corin caught her as she swayed, his arms encircling her with a tenderness born of the bond's full bloom, no longer denied, but embraced in the face of loss. Thorn's bellow shook the valley, his hulking form breaching the outer walls, Ironclaw's tide surging with the promise of slaughter. Yet as the purified waters surged upward, Threading through the mountain's roots to the birthing caves and borders beyond, the lunar beast's frenzy ebbed, shadows retreating, their eyes clearing from madness to wary instinct. The pack's howls unified, a chorus of rebirth under the crown's guidance. Isina's sacrifice the catalyst that healed not just the land, but the fractures in Quran's soul. He held her close, his lips brushing her temple where the light pulsed, the union sealing in blood and breath, a love that proved redemption's fire, not reward's fleeting warmth. "You give everything," he whispered, voice breaking against the wind, his melancholy yielding to the ethical light she embodied. Tears traced his cheek, mingling with the snow, as her vision dimmed, the crown's glow fading into her skin like a tattoo of destiny. Freedom or power? She had chosen compassion's path, binding them in a realm above alphas and omegas, where the mother of the pack rose from rejection's ashes. But as Thorn's forces faltered, sensing the shift in the air, Isina's strength waned, the cost etching deeper, her life for the pack's dawn. A final choice that left Cora kneeling in the snow, cradling the light that had crowned them both. What was rebirth, if not this visceral union, love's proof in the surrender of self, where mercy's flame outshone the sword's cold gleam, yet whispered of losses yet to mourn? The moon hung low, witness to the fragile victory. As the wind carried the first cries of healed pups echoing through the peaks, a symphony of hope laced with the ache of what might yet be lost. The snow's hush deepened as the purified spring surged with silvered vigor, its waters threading through the mountain's hidden arteries like veins reborn from winter's grasp. Isina slumped in Corin's arms, the lunar crown's soft luminescence ebbing into her skin, a faint tattoo of ethereal filigree that traced her brow and collarbone. No cold metals bite, but a warm pulse, the goddess's whisper etched in light. Her wounds gaped wider now, the sacrifice's toll carving deeper than fangs ever could, blood flowing in rhythmic waves that soaked his cloak, staining the white expanse crimson. Each breath was a labored vow, her body the forge where the pack's healing was hammered from her fading essence. The wind carried the shifting tide below, Ironclaw's howls fracturing into retreat, Thorn's brute form wheeling back as the frenzy's poison dissolved, his raiders scattering like shadows before dawn's reluctant creep. Corin's grip tightened, his stormy eyes locked on her face. The king's unyielding facade shattered into raw vulnerability. Guilt had been his throne's undercurrent, a melancholy river carving canyons in his soul since his mate's fall. But now it crested into something fiercer, recognition of the redemption she offered, not as balm, but as proof, demanding he choose union over isolation's cold liberty. "Isina," he rasped, voice fracturing like ice under pressure, his free hand cradling her cheek, thumb tracing the crown's fading glow. The scent of pine and blood enveloped them, mingling with the spring's fresh mineral clarity, a sensory hymn to the Rinascimento unfolding. He had resisted the bond's pull since the cave, rationalizing it as alpha duty to the overlooked healer. But here, in the ridge's merciless embrace, denial crumbled. Love was no reward's fleeting spark. It was this visceral surrender, her light piercing his shadows, forcing him to kneel not in defeat, but in the ethical fire of shared fate. She met his gaze, her vision a haze of silver and storm, the Pathfinder's sight lingering in echoes, visions of the pack's future, pups thriving under a mended weave, borders fortified not by iron, but by compassion's quiet reign. Rejection had defined her, the Omega dismissed, her gifts unseen until the birthing dens demanded her stand. Yet in this waning, she glimpsed rebirth's cruel beauty. The crown hummed against her skin, drawing from her core to seal the earth's wounds, but the cost etched eternal. Her life for the pack's dawn, a mother's sacrifice crowning her above kings. Faith warred with despair in her chest, the moral crux a blade's edge, power in yielding her essence to heal all, or the freedom of letting go, leaving Corin to his solitary wars. The pack. They breathe because of this, she murmured, her fingers weak against his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart mirror her faltering rhythm. The air tasted of frost and renewal, the distant weavos unifying into a chorus of gratitude, Pups' cries piercing the gale like stars breaking through clouds. Thorn's final roar echoed from the valley, a defeated thunder as his forces melted into the tree line, the purified waters rippling outward to cleanse the lunar beast's madness, their forms shifting back to wary wolves under the moon's approving arc. Eric stirred at their feet, purged and bound, his eyes reflecting the light's mercy, a traitor reborn as witness, his betrayal's root exposed and severed. Corin spared him not from weakness, but from the choice Isina's gift illuminated, compassion as the pack's true spine, weaving forgiveness into strength where vengeance would only fracture further. He rose slightly, pulling her closer, his lips brushing her temple where the crown's glow pulsed like a shared heartbeat. "You are its mother now," he whispered, the words a vow etched in breath and blood, his melancholy yielding to the union's inexorable pull. No longer the distant alpha, he was hers in this moment, marked by guilt no more, but by the redemption she embodied, their bond a bridge from exile to sovereignty. Pain crested within her, a tidal wave that blurred the peaks into luminous veils, the crown's light flaring one final time to knit the mountain's scars. She felt the goddess's caress, cool as moonlight on fevered skin, channeling her sacrifice into the land's rebirth. Springs flowing pure, borders humming with restored wards, the pack's spirit rising from the ashes of betrayal. Her body arched, a gasp escaping as vitality drained, but in its wake came peace, not despair's void, but faith's quiet flame. Corin held her through it, his tears tracing hot paths down her cheek, mingling with the snow's chill, the king's ethical core finding solace in her choice. Love proved itself here, in the renunciation of self for the greater weave, transcending hierarchies where an Omega's light crowned the realm. As the crown dissolved fully into her flesh, a subtle scar of silver veins, Isina's eyes fluttered shut, her breath slowing to the wind's sigh. The pack's howls swelled, a lunar symphony honoring the mother who had given all, her hidden gift the key to their enduring flame. Corin cradled her in the snow, the union sealed in loss and light, his voice a broken murmur against her hair. "Rest now, my pathfinder. You've made us whole." The moon dipped toward horizon's edge, casting the ridge in golden hues laced with blue, symbols of fire and blood yielding to dawn's promise. Rebirth was no gentle bloom. It was this forge of sacrifice where rejection forged royalty and love's redemption burned eternal, a beacon for the wandering souls under the goddess's watchful gaze. The mountain stood sentinel, its winds whispering of choices made, fates intertwined, and the quiet power of mercy's crown, proof that from the depths of pain, true strength always rises. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.